make sure that you are diversified, right? I mean, if your strategy has been heavily reliant on Facebook to get traffic, diversify outside of traffic.
Welcome to Honest E-Commerce, where we're dedicated to cutting through the BS and finding actionable advice for online store owners. I'm your host, Chase Clymer, and I believe running an online business does not have to be complicated or a guessing game. If you're struggling with scaling your sales, Electric Eye is here to help. To apply to work with us, visit electriceye.io/connect to learn more. Now let's get on with the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Honest E-Commerce. I'm Chase Clymer, and today I'm bringing to the show, he just shared with me a little bit in the pre-show about being one of the first people doing the thing on eBay. So this is going to be a great conversation. Nowadays, he is the president and co-founder of DFO Global. Jordan Rollband, welcome to the show.
Hey Chase, thanks for having me on. Hi to everybody listening.
Awesome. So take me back to eBay. So were you using eBay before PayPal?
I was using eBay before PayPal. So I was working, during high school. I was working in New York City at an antique flea market. It's my father's business. I was helping him out on the weekends, and I had no interest in his business whatsoever. So he was dealing in antique prints and books and other like tchotchkes, I would call them. But I met a gentleman there that was selling watches, and I approached him and basically said, like, hey, I know you know my dad, but I'm not interested in his business. I'm really interested in watches. I'm fascinated by watches. Do you have it? Like, could you give me a job? And he kind of laughed and he was like, well, what do you know about watches? I'm like, nothing other than that they look really awesome. So he said, well, I'm not going to give you a job, but I'll tell you what I can do. You can work, if it's okay with your dad, you could work for me as an apprentice, for the next few months. And basically, he had the conversation with my dad. I talked to him on a Sunday night, basically agreed that I would take on this apprenticeship with this gentleman. And for the next 3 months, I basically worked as his apprentice. I worked for him on a Saturday and Sunday. The days were very long and grueling. So, I'd be out there somewhere around 4:00 in the morning. We'd work till 6:00 at night. I wasn't getting paid for any of this, but basically I got an education in watches. And after 3 months, he gave me a few watches. He said, hey, here's some watches. I'd like you to try to sell these, and whatever you make on the watches, we'll split the profits. So I took the watches. There were 5 of them. I took the 5 watches. I bought them back to my buddies, at home, and wound up selling them all that week. And I came back and I said, like, hey, I sold those 5 watches. Do you have any more? Because I have some other people looking for watches. Anyway, fast forward a year, I turned this into a small little business. He set me up with my own booth at the flea market. So I was running a booth there. I was also then selling watches to friends, family, getting referrals, and had built a nice little watch business. And, one day I was at home and just, kind of doing some like research on the watch market and how I could expand. And I came across eBay, and this is, I think sometime around 1997. So did a little research on eBay and how to become a seller there. And, I was talking to my dad that night, and I was like, hey, I think I'm going to start selling these watches on eBay. And he was like, oh, that's amazing. Like, why don't we also set up a store so I could sell some of my stuff on eBay? So I wound up working with him, set up a store, and basically within the matter of a few weeks, was up and running on eBay. Had thrown up a few watches and didn't really know what to expect. And I think actually what happened is I wound up really underestimating the market, because pretty much all of the product that I put up on eBay within the first few days was already gone. So I saw that there was obviously something here. So I started listing more watches. I was taking watches from the gentleman that I was working with, basically putting as many of those watches on. And then also at this point, I had made some of my own connections. So I was basically just rounding up all these different watches from watch dealers in New York City to sell on eBay. The business really took off. I became one of eBay's first power sellers. We had really figured out that there was some serious money to be made on the platform there. And this is obviously all pre PayPal. And once PayPal was then introduced into the platform, well, eBay dramatically changed. I think my business at that point had really grown. As a young guy, I'd made some pretty decent money, but I also had different interests at that point. And I basically let the store go. I was going to college. I had an opportunity to take a sort of a partnership or a job with a friend of mine doing something completely outside of what I was doing on eBay. And I wanted to learn some new skills. So, the time I was spending basically now was rolled into something else. And, I think that, that next career path, I wouldn't say it was what directly led me to where I am today, but I think indirectly it sort of laid that foundation to bring me to this point.
Absolutely. So let's talk about this point now. So fast forward, 20 something years. Now we're in 2019. This is probably going to come out the week of Black Friday, if I have my math right. So what are you up to these days?
Amazing. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm the president and co-founder of DFO Global Performance Commerce. We're a performance marketing agency that specializes in e-commerce. The business is 6.5 years old. It started with 10 people in 2 different offices. So one in Vancouver, Canada, and the other one here in New York City, where I'm currently based. And if I fast forward to today, we're now 9 offices with about 350 employees. And we specialize in all facets of e-commerce. We build out technology that, the back-end technology that powers e-commerce, right? So we have a similar platform to Shopify that basically powers the whole back end of our business that we've built internally. I say Shopify, but really it's sort of like Shopify meets ClickFunnels, right? So it has all of the functionality of a full service CRM with an integrated funnel builder that basically allows us to make creatives for all of our different e-commerce projects, utilizing drag and drop methodologies. We also do all of our own fulfillment. So any of the products that we're selling, we're fulfilling for ourselves. We've set up fulfillment centers in Asia, Europe, and the US. So, as the name, right, DFO Global, we're truly a global company. We sell into somewhere between 60 and 70 different markets, depending on the product. So we've built systems, and obviously we've, fulfillment centers, et cetera, to essentially service that business. We also do all of our own customer service internally. And then I think really the big part of our business, which is what brought us here and really what I was doing before I started DFO, is really focused around buying and selling media. So, we're experts in the ability to buy media at very high volumes off of all of the major platforms. So, obviously, over the last 10 years, Facebook and Instagram, well, at least Facebook and more recently Instagram, have been a big part of our business. But we also specialize in running, traffic via Google, whether it's AdWords or the Google Display Network. And then over the last few years, we've gotten really good at buying traffic through all the different native sources. Outbrain and Taboola specifically, but we also do a lot of direct site buying. So we're still working with some of the older properties such as Yahoo or MSN, where we have direct relationships with them. And basically, we're doing anywhere from 2 to 3 buys per week on each one of those platforms.
Cool. That's so awesome, the growth of your business. So I'm going to ask a really heated question at this point.
Sure.
Because a lot of our listeners are small businesses. They're just getting started. Maybe they've got those first couple of wins under their belt. When do you think is the right time for a business to start thinking about paid media?
Well, it's a good question. For us, it's because that's where I started. That was our approach from day one, right? Like, fortunately, as a business, between myself and my partner, I had some success before we started this business. He had also been very successful. So the business wasn't necessarily bootstrapped. I think at some point, we obviously had to decide in terms of growth, like what that growth strategy would look like. But we basically had enough capital to get the business up and running and take on this paid media approach. So I'd say for anyone that has the ability to do so, I think it's really critical in terms of being able to help propel growth, right? So, you can certainly grow a business, and I have some other businesses that I'm involved in, where you can utilize social media, you can utilize, really any form of like non-paid media to help grow the business. But, when you're talking about e-commerce, and I mean, especially when you're talking about the ability to sell product, right? And we're thinking right now, like outside of like building a brand where, essentially when you're building out brands, it's a whole different methodology that you're using. But if you're talking about the ability to sell products, really it's time to market, the speed in which you can, buy and sell that product, the speed in which you can fulfill that product and get that product directly to your consumers, and your ability to buy media better than those that you're competing against for similar type products on the same media platforms, right? So, having that paid media approach, I think, is very critical to the overall success of the products that you're trying to sell. So if you can implement those strategies, and we're not talking about a strategy where you need a ton of budget immediately, but the reality is that you need to be able to spend enough money to figure out your metrics and then really analyze that and make sure that the product that you're going to sell is going to be viable, at least for, my opinion, at least for 6 to 9 months.
That's all fantastic advice. I mean, I think just to kind of peel it back to one statement, like, unless you're funded, do not go into debt with paid media, because it takes a bit of money to figure out that path forward.
And unless you're funded, do not go into debt with paid media. But I mean, I think on the other hand, for anybody that's starting up a business, I mean, you also need to be very realistic about the expectations and the strategy in which you're utilizing to start that business, right? So, as a young man, I mean, I've been involved in, we talked a little bit about the watches, and I made everything very simple. Like, yeah, I had a deal. This guy gave me some watches, but it wasn't as cut and dry as that, right? I had to make some sacrifices in order to get those watches, which really started that business. And there's been a bunch of different businesses that I've been involved in along the way where, things were tight for me and I was bootstrapped, and I had to really, make some long and hard decisions on what I wanted to do to get the business up and running, right? So while I'm certainly not the most aggressive personality when it comes to business, I also understand that if you're overly risk adverse, especially being an entrepreneur, it's very difficult to be successful, because there are those that are willing to take those chances to really push their business to the next level.
Support for today's podcast comes from our friends at Simpler, a new way to staff 24/7 sales and customer service on your e-commerce store. It works with your existing email and chat platforms, so setup is quick and easy. Simpler's network of on-demand, US-based Simpler specialists are standing by to answer your customers' most common questions. Set it up for free today and then turn it on or off depending on your customer volume. You only pay $2.25 for every resolution. There are no hidden fees, contracts, or minimums. Close more sales with Simpler by staffing your email and live chat around the clock with Simpler specialists. Start your free 7-day trial at simpler.ai/honest. That's simpler.ai/HONEST. Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you're okay with kind of standing still, you're not going to grow at all. Like, even your organic growth might start to top out when it gets to the end of what you can do. You got to take a little bit of risk in your business. And then it's just kind of like your appetite of how you can kind of stomach it.
That's right.
Some people can stomach it more, some people can't. Luckily, I have a business partner that balances me out, because I believe everything's going to work itself out, which is just a trait I have.
Yeah. I mean, and I've been in that situation too before, right? Where I'm like, this is definitely going to work itself out. And then, 6 months later, it's like, well, hasn't worked itself out yet. So what do we do from here?
That was a very expensive lesson.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the amazing thing about, being an entrepreneur and being in business. Those lessons, while they're expensive, they're also, assuming you take away the right information from those lessons, they're also highly valuable, right? I look at them and they're actually more valuable than even making money in some of these businesses, because I look at what I could have potentially earned with the business that I was starting, and I'm like, wow, yeah, this would have been an okay business. I could have made some money here. But on the other hand, maybe I made some decisions that weren't necessarily the right decision for the business. But I learned and was able to essentially, take those decisions and channel them in a different direction in a different business that I started, which became highly successful because of the behind the scenes moves that I was making. And a lot of that's from the lessons that I learned in some of these smaller businesses.
Oh,
so there's, information is obviously truly valuable.
yeah, you can't put a price on it. So just kind of pivot a little bit here. We're huge fans of Shopify on this show. I am personally, and I believe a lot of our audience probably has Shopify stores. So let's do a quick compare and contrast between the Shopify platform and kind of like an end solution like you guys offer, just to show the people what else is out there.
Sure. Well, I will say with Shopify, I know a lot of their team personally. Over the years, again, having been in e-commerce and the lead gen business and really all forms of media. I mean, I've made some relationships with people that work at Shopify. I've been to their headquarters in Ottawa. They've built an amazing business. So let me just start by saying that they've built an amazing business. Where I think we differ is where Shopify basically made a sort of a plug and play model for really anybody that wants to be in e-commerce. We've basically built systems for those that are a little more experienced, right? So focusing on individuals or groups that maybe are going from running a small e-commerce business to like a mid-tier e-commerce business. And a lot of that's based on revenue, but also based on the size of your team and also the skill sets that you possess internally. So when we started building our software 6.5 years ago, we built it out with three main and key factors. And the first one was speed, right? So I know that today, the way that our systems were built, our pages, our back end will essentially outperform any other systems out there, right? In terms of like load speeds, the way in which users can interact with the pages, et cetera. So, that was sort of the first thing that we really spent a lot of time focusing on is how could we create a product that will essentially allow our load speeds to beat any of those that are on the market. And I think, we did a really good job of accomplishing that. The second was that as a business, we really focused a lot of our time and efforts in selling products outside of the U.S. And while obviously the U.S. is an amazing market for e-commerce, there's billions of people that are living outside of the U.S. that we wanted to have the ability to sell to for a number of different reasons. I mean, the most obvious one being that when the U.S. is overcrowded and highly competitive, there are other countries that you may find lower price points on media for example, being one of them. Two, we also use strategies where we're utilizing influencers. And, I found over the years that we could find and build relationships with a lot of influencers outside of the US at either a much lower cost or in some instances where they're basically just willing to work with us for free because they want to build up their reputation, and it's worked out really well for us. So we've built the systems out, keeping that in mind that everything we were doing was going to basically run outside of the U.S. From the way that customer service works to the way that our fulfillment centers integrate into our systems, we built a completely different approach than what Shopify was doing. And then I think the third one was really looking at Shopify and what ClickFunnels was doing and saying to ourselves, like, here are two very different products. They solve probably some of the most important problems that individuals in the e-commerce space would really face, when they're building out their product offerings. Why don't we bring, the best of each of those worlds together and build them within one system?
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of Russell here. I've definitely recommended .com Secrets before. And if you are unfamiliar with ClickFunnels, it's a nice software. I feel his software is specifically targeted more towards consulting. I don't know if you'd agree with that or not, but I would love to kind of explore that a bit more with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ClickFunnels is, was basically built on the backbone of selling information, right? So, if you look at Shopify, I mean, Shopify was clearly built with the purpose of being able to bring in any entrepreneur, small business, et cetera, and allow them to, within a few clicks to have an e-commerce store up and running. ClickFunnels was really built sort of on the opposite spectrum of where Shopify was living, basically saying, if you're in the information business, here's a tool that you can utilize to launch your info products. How they differ, I mean, Shopify is a more complete solution, whereas ClickFunnels, and what I love about ClickFunnels, and what I found really interesting about what they had built early on, is the drag and drop functionality, right? So basically, you can have an optimized site up within a day, and basically within that site, because of the drag and drop functionality, you can make all of your changes, you can make language changes, you can make design changes, you can make other optimization checkouts on the checkout pages, within a matter of a few minutes, which makes everything very easy. And what I think they started to do is where they really focused a lot of their efforts initially, in the information space. They obviously saw the success that Shopify was happening, and they started to gear a lot of the V2, the next stage of their product development, focusing around e-commerce.
Yeah, there's definitely a pretty similar application out there in the Shopify ecosystem. Carthook is a Shopify plugin that mimics some of the stuff that that's the book that ClickFunnels does, in the kind of the methodologies behind it. It really makes sense if you've got like a more specific product line. So say for like a clothing brand, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But if you've got like one particular product and then another one that's very similar, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, Chase. I mean, that's well said on that. So I mean, I think and I will take a step back and even say with our business. So really for us, where we found success is essentially building out individual product offerings. We call them funnels, right? ClickFunnels obviously, had a similar concept in the way in which that they were looking at these products that they were building out. And basically, each product that we sell is built into a simple website or a funnel, if I may, where basically we're pushing consumers to those funnels by utilizing certain tactics on Facebook or Instagram or Google, et cetera. And we're really focusing on that one hero product. So we're not pushing them to an e-commerce storefront. We're basically just pushing them to a page that whole page is built and designed around to get them to purchase that one product, right? And then once they've purchased that product, we basically have a sales flow, right? Or what we now call a funnel, where we're then selling them similar type products, and we're basically looking for a certain percentage of people to take, what we would call like the step 2 within the funnel, right? The second offer that we're presenting them. And then obviously there's a third offer that we present them. And we're basically looking at percentages, which, assuming we hit our metrics based on the way that we're optimizing our pages, allow us to make money on that first touch sale.
Absolutely. So I guess this is a great time to bring up, like, what is the difference between performance marketing and just like, I'm running Google ads?
For performance marketers, right, and my background has always been in, what we call like cost per acquisition, so CPA marketing. Basically, what it means is that if you're working with us as, for instance, as a client, because we also do work with certain groups where we take on clients. If you're working with us, we do everything based on an acquisition cost, right? So, for instance, if you're working with an agency, typically the way agencies work are on a cost plus model. So they basically say, hey, we're planning to spend, $50,000 on Facebook this month. And, for that $50,000 in spend, we're going to deliver X, Y, and Z. And based on that, we collect a certain percentage of that spend that we essentially do on your behalf, right? But there's no guarantee beyond that if they can actually deliver. And it's not a bad model at all, but there's no delivery guarantee. Whereas on a performance base, we only make money if we deliver. So, we don't discuss what the overall budget is, or we can have a conversation about the budget, but our goal isn't to spend $50,000 of our clients' money. Our goal is to say, here's your back end profitability. Here's what our metrics look like. We know that you're working on a desired margin, and therefore, let's come up with a cost per acquisition that works for all of us. And our goal then is to work to achieve that cost per acquisition. And if we do so, any of the money that's made in between the agreed CPA and what we're paying for on the media side basically becomes our margin. So if we do a really good job at buying that media, we could obviously be highly profitable. If we're not doing such a good job, then maybe we're still running the product offering, but we're running it at a lower margin. And if we're not successful at all, then basically we're losing money, and it's our jobs to then go back and optimize. But our clients aren't actually having to cover those losses for us, right? Whereas with an agency can come back to you and basically say, hey, we spent the $50,000 budget, we got you 20 sales, so now your acquisition cost is X. And based on back-end metrics, you probably weren't profitable, but we still need to be paid our fee anyway, because that's how the contract reads, right? And that's what we agreed to. So this model basically says, we're going to take all of the risk on buying the media, and if we're not successful, you don't lose any money. However, if we are highly successful, we get to participate by potentially making more in terms of the margin, right? That spread of what the media is costing us versus what you're paying.
Let's be honest today. All of your customers are going to have questions. And what are you doing to manage all those questions? Do you have a help desk for your business? One of our sponsors of today's episode is Gorgias, and Gorgias is the #1 rated help desk for e-commerce. It integrates seamlessly with Shopify. We have installed it on a bunch of stores. It's also used by brands like Movement and Rothy's. And what it does is it takes all of your customer insights and information, brings it into one amazing dashboard so you can solve their problem as quickly as possible. If you want to give Gorgias a try, visit gorgias.link/honest. That's GORGIAS.LINK/HONEST to get your second month free. Absolutely. And so, if I'm sitting here as a small business owner, I'm like, this sounds great. I don't have to pay and, everything's good. I want to point out two things. One of them is something I know, and then one of them I'm assuming, so we'll see if I'm right. So one, the client is still paying for the media spend.
Well, yes and no. They're paying in the sense that every time we drive a sale, they're paying us for that sale. But they're not paying unless we actually deliver for them. So if there's no sales generated, they're not paying. We as a company, we cover the spend ourselves. Okay.
And then my next question is, you probably have a particular type of client. I'm assuming they're well into their business life cycle. They've got a very good product market fit. I'm assuming you're not taking on everybody.
It's interesting. If I look at my career, and I've been doing CPA marketing now for the last 14 years, I've worked with so many different clients. And if I look back, at the third-party clients that I've worked with over the years, there's two groups in particular that I can think of that have been highly successful, and both of them were groups that I basically started with. They had some experience with building out offerings online, but basically had never run under the CPA model. Both businesses were bootstrapped, but both of them to date have been my most successful clients, right? And I think a lot of that's because just because of the way in which we work together. We formed a really good relationship. They looked at me as sort of a partner in their business and vice versa. In the very early stages when we started working together, while they both were living in California, I'm here in New York. They came to visit me a few times. I went out to visit them. I really understood their business. They understood what I needed and what my team needed to be successful. And because I think we worked together so well, the businesses were both able to grow and scale way beyond probably what either of us thought we could do together. And I've had some clients, on the opposite spectrum of that. I've had some clients who have tons of experience in marketing, maybe not necessarily CPA marketing, but in marketing. They've come to the table with capital. They've had some great product ideas, but for whatever reason, we just weren't able to execute on a high level. And I think a lot of that comes down to, commitment, right? Putting the time and effort and energy into really building your business. And, I think for a lot of younger entrepreneurs, and, young, I mean, not necessarily in age, but just people that are starting out, they're missing, at least in the ones that have, struggles in terms of being successful. I feel that they're always missing some part of their business, right? Whether it's the dedication or the diligence, and by that, I mean, where I've dealt with groups who they have a job and then they also want to be an entrepreneur and they want to start building things, but they're not necessarily willing to go all in to back themselves. I found that working with those types of groups, at least in my experience, has always been difficult. But if it's somebody that's willing to go all in the business, we can typically work with them. And even with the product ideas and offerings, et cetera, like if we need to make changes, and as long as everybody's willing to sort of follow that same roadmap to being successful, it usually will work itself out in the end.
Absolutely. I like how you were being honest, saying, it works sometimes and sometimes it doesn't. I appreciate the honesty.
Yeah. I mean, well, that's kind of the truth of it, right? I mean, it does. I mean, I've seen a lot of different people over the years, become highly successful by jumping right in and just sort of going. Yet I've seen lots that haven't been. And as I said, I mean, I think my two biggest clients over the years are, if I look at it in terms of just revenue, what we've done together, are probably those two groups that I worked with from years back, who once they found some success, they basically just stuck to a sort of blueprint that they built with the first offering and said, we're going to continue to build things that are very similar to what we've done in the past. And while the market is evolving, we'll continue to evolve with it, but we know it works for us and we won't try to deviate from what's been successful.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to highlight that real quick, because that is like a key topic to that book, Good to Great. I don't know if you've ever read that.
Yep. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
It's okay. So you start a successful business, and then the number one way people ruin successful businesses is by starting other businesses or buying other businesses that aren't similar.
Yes. I can tell you from personal experience.
Yeah, the systems are all completely different. You have to learn something. The learning curve's off. Like, that's the number one reason that ruins good businesses, is like they start acquiring all sorts of crazy stuff. And I think one of the examples in the book it was like RJ Reynolds or something. They were like buying, that's a tobacco company, a sin product, as you will. But then they like bought like something that was like completely like out of there. It was like cereal or something. They bought Nestle. I'm like something like that. And then they sold it for a loss a couple of years later because they realized like they didn't understand that at all. Like, they knew sin products. They knew how to market that. I think they kept chocolate like because it was close enough, but like they had to get rid of all this other stuff because it was so different.
Chase, like as an entrepreneur, right? And I feel like I've been an entrepreneur my whole life. I can tell you that when I'm very focused on a business, and that's all I think about, the business is generally very successful. But when, and we all are, right? Like, we all at some point become guilty of shiny object syndrome. When that kicks in, and you start looking at all these different opportunities that come your way. And I think, the more successful you become, the more naturally, the more opportunities that just come your way. And once you start trying to take on too many new things and you're going down all these different paths, not only do those businesses suffer, but the reality is that your core business also suffers, right? I mean, unless you have groups of people that are going to come in and can run these businesses for you, it's very hard to start managing all these different businesses at a high level. And the reality is to be successful, I mean, you need to be totally into the business, right? Um, I mean, it's happened to me so many different times. I mean, even in the last 6.5 years with DFO, we've tried to diversify into different businesses at times. And basically what happens is we wind up failing and coming back to our core business and then spending more time on what our core business is and optimizing around that. And that's where we always find the most success. So, what I'll do with these other opportunities is either pass on them, or I try to find other partners, right, that we could potentially do something with that can take these opportunities on and really run them, for us, where we're then just a small piece of the business, right? So this way we don't have to be, focusing tons of attention on these new businesses. We can stay all in on our business and then let those other groups of people focus on, the new business at hand.
Absolutely.
Right. And I think that so far, in doing that over the last few years, that model has worked out way better for us, for a number of different reasons. And I think it's really also allowed us to stay focused on, what we're doing as DFO and really where we want to go, over the next 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, et cetera.
Absolutely. So before we go here, I just want to thank you for coming on the show. We had a lot of fun conversations. Before we sign off here, is there anything that we haven't discussed that you think it would be worthwhile for our audience?
Well, yeah, we touched on some really interesting points. And what I'd say is, you had mentioned that you had, a lot of entrepreneurs that are here and they're getting into e-commerce or in e-commerce and utilizing Shopify. What I've learned about e-commerce over the years is that, there's going to be a lot of ups and downs, and that things are changing, and they're constantly changing, and they're evolving very quickly. And I think what I just would want to say is that if you believe in your business and you really believe in what you're doing and you're putting the work in, and you have great product or great concepts for products, don't get frustrated with what's happening in the market, especially right now, because Facebook over the last year or so, and I know a lot of people are buying traffic off Facebook. Facebook has been extremely difficult to work with for a number of different reasons, right? Some of it could potentially be some of our business models. Other reasons are because Facebook is just under a ton of scrutiny right now, and they're making a lot of changes, and therefore, they've hired lots of new people who are just not familiar with the processes and procedures of Facebook itself. And I could see a lot of mistakes being made across the platform. I think at some point this will all regularize itself, and you just have to be patient, right? Because I feel and I hear a lot of people right now that are quite frustrated and almost throwing their hands up in the air, like, hey, I built this business and now I'm having some issues with Facebook. I don't know what to do. So I'd say one is, Facebook is still constantly growing in terms of the people that are using the platform, or I'd say Facebook and Instagram and their different product offerings. So the traffic is certainly there. Two, I'd say just outside of that, make sure that you are diversified, right? I mean, if your strategy has been heavily reliant on Facebook to get traffic, diversify outside of traffic. I've talked about Google, and I can tell you that for us as a business, Google has been a great source of traffic for us. The native platforms, so Taboola and Outbrain have also been highly successful for us. But also, if you're selling certain types of products, especially like niche products, don't be afraid to reach out to direct sites and work deals with them, because believe me, just as we're all looking to figure out different ways to find traffic and to monetize what we're doing. A lot of these sites are doing the same thing, and they're basically just sitting around like waiting for the right opportunity to come to them for a product that may really resonate well with their audience.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah, thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show and sharing their journey and knowledge with us today. We've got a lot to think about and potentially add into our businesses. Links and more information will be available in the show notes as well. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, feel free to reach out and learn more at electriceye.io/connect. Also, make sure you subscribe and leave an amazing review. Thank you.